I thought he asked you to do that right after the meeting, no?
I just didn't, I was in a fog. That's okay.
Well, Brian provided a list that
Oh, I'm just going to read the
anybody
list.
could work with. So.
There, so I will depend on anybody else to have reviewed those, and if I
I
hear a
move we
motion to
approve the
approve.
minutes, Ken's minutes of November 5th.
Okay, and second,
Second.
any discussion? Obviously a superb job, Ken.
I'm good at this.
Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Thank you. We've taken care of that.
Come in, but just be quiet.
Okay, the next item, and we've had lots of discussion about public engagement and doing it under the conditions that we're currently in. And Brian coordinated a call that included, I believe, Ken, Panny, and Erica. Welcome, Mark, with MAPC. So how do you want to handle this, Brian?
I think that Panny was going to give an update and a summary of how the call went.
Yes. With my glasses on, because some people write really small emails. We met with a woman named Julie Curti and two of her MAPC cohorts, and I'm afraid I don't know their names. She's the new sub-regional coordinator for MAPC. And in 40 minutes, we covered a fair amount of territory. They seemed very open to helping us with things that probably wouldn't take them a lot of time, and wouldn't cost us any money. They're presently revising their regional plan for 2050 time horizon, and they'll keep us posted where we are. And they said they'd send us a list of helpful data sources for our that currently exist. They'd send us anything they know about regional efforts to predict post-pandemic trends. They are going to follow up on the technical assistance application and she didn't seem surprised at all that we hadn't heard anything back, which sort of surprised me. But I guess things move slowly. Then we talked about how we go about doing outreach during a pandemic. And apparently they have a shared practices guide for virtual meetings. And we talked about that some. And basically they liked our concept of sort of communications group is sort of looking at this as we educate people, then before you can have forums, you have to really educate people to what you're talking about. And that's what we're doing with the TED Talks. And they liked that idea. They thought that was very effective. So, and they talked about, constraints of getting people together and how you divide them up into smaller groups and that type of thing. And so we'll see. It was general, very general. It turns out that if you have them do, let's say, a website for you, I guess it's a website, it's fairly pricey. It's $20,000 to $30,000. It's not cheap. And so, I think, if we can get this other grant, that would be great, but I don't think we can really consider having them do a major part of this because obviously we don't have the funding behind it. Ken and Brian, add whatever you feel like I missed.
I guess I just wanted to follow up on that last piece a little bit because I thought that was maybe a little bit surprising just to know that, like, if you spend some time looking at other websites where the Regional Planning Authority seems to have been involved with helping the community with their master plan, it sounds like there can be a pretty significant price tag associated with that. And when I said, like, how much did this engagement cost? And she said, oh, like $20,000 to $30,000. I thought that also included the actual substantive research into the various topic areas like land use and traffic and all that. But it's actually, that's $20,000 to $30,000 just for like the website and public engagement assistance. So that's really, I'm not so sure that that's in our budget. And I think we made that kind of clear to them too.
I think so.
Brian, it would be interesting, and I could certainly go back to them to see what sort of the ballpark figure would be if we did the website ourselves and then they did the public engagement. That would sort of be interesting to see if that would be in our price range. I don't know if that's possible to separate those two out, but if it is, that could be something worth pursuing.
Yeah, and Erica, you've been through this with the EDC, right? Using the same software?
That's correct. So a couple of years ago on the EDC, there was a woman that did website design, and she used a particular program that MAPC uses. So I think, if we wanted to do it in-house, I think we could do that.
Yeah,
It's really, it comes down to a matter of time, if there's enough time in the day to get it done, kind of thing. But I certainly think we have the capability to do it.
It can't hurt to ask, can it, Erica?
To see what a separate cost just for the engagement piece would be. Yeah, exactly.
All we're doing is asking for a price.
Exactly.
And exactly what the scope of that would be. Because I work with two other nonprofits, both of whom developed with a fair amount of talent in-house the same software websites. And I mean, they weren't terribly slick, but they sure got the information across. And I think with the support of Abby and Megan, we can certainly develop something that is, I wouldn't say slick, but communicates appropriately. But $20,000 or $30,000, in my experience, is what you would pay a good web designer to come up with a completely new, very innovative website. And it sounds pretty big to me, way bigger than either of the other organizations I've been involved with paid for it. And you can, I mean, in the case of Sturbridge Village, when you get into 3D video and that kind of stuff, I mean, you're getting up into the literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. But for something that conveys information and can be used as something that can get out to Facebook and get out to the community as a whole quickly and informally, I think it's going to be a lot cheaper. So I think we need to look into that and find out, Brian, as you said, let's find out what we get for 20 or 30K. And then let's take a look at what we think initially with public outreach and communication, the type of content we would use. And the combination of the two would give us an idea of what the effectiveness, bang for our buck would be to pursue that approach. Keeping in mind, frankly, that we do have the town website and our component of it. And we do have mechanisms to vector people to that, particularly on Facebook. Anyway, I would suggest that, Brian, if you could talk to them about what the scope is and public outreach and communications, take a look at what we would see as the most effective content and approach to using a website. Then we can start making some decisions. And we may be able to apply for a technical assistance grant to do that kind of thing. I don't have a lot of faith in that at the moment because their money is going to an awful lot of other activities with other towns that are living in the virtual world at the same time.
The
So,
one thing that I was going to mention that I found quite good was they did a lot of assistance to the town of Dedham. Now it's 4 times the size of us, but they did a master plan over the last year and a half or so, partly last year and then partly during the shutdown. And so they have a lot of experience there that at least some of it is documented on the MAPC website. I haven't checked all that out, but it sounded very useful to look at some of what Dedham has done in the way of the outreach and the communications and using breakout rooms and other things of that sort. And so I think we can learn from that essentially at no cost, except for our own time, to go onto the MAPC website and really read some of that stuff.
okay, so let's do a 2-pronged approach here. Brian, if you can get a little more information on what is the scope of something that would cost $20,000+, and at the same time we can get the public outreach and communication team, which I believe meets again on January 4th or
7th,
7th.
I think. I think it's the 7th.
The 7th.
Yeah.
So by then, if we can get some heads together and come up with what we believe would be the added advantage and scope and content of a website over and above what we already have in vectoring with public, with media, both our own in the town as well as our own site.
Were we also talking about, Erica, separating the website from the public outreach?
Well, I think what would be a really easy first step is, even if Brian wants me to do this, I could either reach out to MAPC or to Dedham directly and just ask them for their scope of services for that particular piece. And I'm sure they would send it and we could just review that.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great idea.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, much easier. Just one
But
more thing on
Brian-
your list to do, right, Erica?
Well, that's so easy though. So Brian, if you'd like, I'm happy to, that's easy. I can certainly do that. So
Thank you. That would be great. Thanks.
I'll do that.
Okay, but nonetheless, I think we need to think about what added advantage a website would provide over and above what we've got and what we'd like to put in it. And it's not just missing parts, it's providing information and outreach in a different way that may be a better way. And it may be worthwhile, even though there may be some potential redundancies to what we're already doing. So I'll mention that to the outreach and communication team and see if we can get some input on that by the meeting on the 7th.
And we also should go look at the shared practices webs that they mentioned when they were talking about
Right.
some of the resources for virtual meetings.
Okay, and Erica sent out an email to Public Outreach and Communication Task Group, which took Brian's email and then suggested some actions and approaches to use that. So I will, or Erica, if you can forward your email to everybody in the steering committee, that would be very useful.
I can do that. No problem.
Okay, great. Okay, Brian, I'm sorry. Okay, one of the other things that we talked about last Thursday in the Outreach and Communication Task Group meeting is putting together a clear schedule and scope for subsequent TED Talks. Penny, you want to talk about that? I mean, it was pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we want to take the TED Talks and turn them into newspaper articles, basically. You know, follow up from the TED Talks into something we can publicize on Facebook and the papers. This is the whole Educate Town. And so we were just playing with ideas that we had January, February, March, and April, and we didn't know who would be ready in January. So we thought maybe if Brian, if your tax summary would be ready by February, since you're going to do that TED Talk tonight, put something ready, you know, put something together for the paper.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
we talked about water and sewer in March, and then perhaps Mary, could you do something for cultural and historical TED Talk, and then something so we can publicize it? Is that possible for April?
Yeah, we're starting to work on a draft for it. So yeah, April
Okay,
definitely.
okay. Sound
Yeah, and the
reasonable?
tax.
That's January.
Yeah,
or
and that's
February.
very appropriately scheduled since we're moving into that season now. And the indications now are that a lot of people don't understand. And we're, at least some of them were quite surprised about what they read.
Yeah, what surprised me most when I showed it to a few people, because I thought Brian did a really good job on it, was that they looked at me and said, I had no idea this is how taxes work. And these are people that have lived in town 5 years, 15 years, and 30 years. It just astounded me that you could keep paying your taxes and have no idea where the money's going. But so it was eye-opening to a lot of people. So I think it'll be very effective.
Okay, so we'll at least tentatively schedule, and I think people should be prepared to use that schedule for TED Talks. Now, one other discussion that came up in public outreach and communication was the issue of moving forward, as Brian has suggested in the past, on getting some public engagement on the survey, not just bringing in the perspective through the survey, but beginning to present the results of the survey and then have a real conversation, which I think ties in nicely to the kind of things that MAPC has been doing with other towns. But Brian, you want to talk about that?
Sure. What I was hoping to do was maybe get a few volunteers from this committee who would be willing to work with me over the next several weeks basically what we want to do is take all the good work that the survey task group did in putting together the survey and compiling the results, and then try to convert that into sort of a presentation of what we think the key results are, but also interspersing in some of the like anecdotes from the narrative responses. But we want to keep the presentation short enough so that we can actually have a lot of open Q&A and advertise this as sort of a webinar for anybody in town that's interested. I mean, I think we'd really like to attract a bit of a crowd to just get a conversation going about what did they think of the survey and what did they think of the summaries that they've read. So if there's folks that want to work with me on that, that would be great. You don't have to, you can think about it and shoot me an email later. You don't have to volunteer or anything tonight. But I think,
But if you want to, you can.
yeah. And I think we'd like to have that sort of a public session relatively early in the new year.
Yep. And to your point, I think it's very, very critical that it be a short presentation and then facilitate and encourage people to speak up and have a conversation, not just with us, but with among themselves. One of the things that has been a little bit disappointing, frankly, is with the Apple Country Group as well as the municipal vulnerability group working with MAPC and VHB. It's been advertised as a discussion and ended up being 3/4 of an hour of presentation and 10 minutes of discussion. And you really can't get people talking with any kind of substance in 10 minutes. So to your point, short and sweet, and then, develop a mechanism with the right person of getting people to talk.
Yeah, and I think actually those shared practices for virtual meetings that MAPC shared will be helpful because they kind of help you think about maintaining somewhat of a bit of control over a virtual forum, but still giving people an opportunity to share.
Right. Okay. And Abby and Megan have both experienced the true Bolton volunteerism approach, which is there's a huge difference between being a volunteer and being volunteered. So we
Yes.
gave them the option. And they seem to be fairly enthusiastic about being part of this.
That would be
Right,
awesome.
ladies? Thank you.
Thank you both.
Okay, one item that I wasn't involved in the last meeting, but I think we need to bring to closure is Sharon Chapello, who I can't see and can't hear, but I know she's there.
Would you like a motion to make Sharon
I
a
do,
member of the
and
committee?
I believe according to the minutes, that motion was made, but we need the next step, which is to get the planning board to agree. So Erica, have we gotten any feedback?
Bob, I have it literally on the agenda for their next meeting. So
Okay.
that will happen on January 13th.
Okay,
So
so
when I talked to Erica, she said that Sharon can go ahead and start working, that it's basically, they're
That
gonna
it's
do it.
just, yeah, it's just a
absolutely.
formality.
I mean, we have lots of people working in task groups who aren't members of the steering committee and haven't been formally appointed
Right.
through
Exactly.
the board. But I believe, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, per your minutes, it was approved by this team.
Definitely.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Financier.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, could we just go over it? Maybe somebody else got it. Maybe Ken has it in his notes, but what is the schedule for TED Talks for January, February, March? Who's going next month?
Well, we had talked about, I was looking at where we would take the TED Talks and put it in the papers. The question of who's ready for a TED Talk in January. I mean, you're doing it now. I thought you'd be doing yours in January, which sort of, but you jumped because you're so efficient. So is there someone who's nearly ready to do a TED Talk?
Well, we could have-
January may not have a TED Talk.
Well, we could have the January one be about the survey as a preliminary on our end, laying out what from our point of view, is important to put in the survey.
Well,
That
that's a
there's-
good
that the
point. It
small
doesn't have to
group-
be a TED
The
Talk.
small group that you're talking about could have a little meeting of their own and come up with a 15-minute talk on the survey to this group, and then go from there toward the public one. That would be one.
Molly?
I don't know.
Molly there somewhere?
Yeah, she's there.
Molly? Would you be willing to do that?
Sure.
Okay. You get January, but it's not till later in January, so.
Is there a template or should I loop in with you after?
I mean, there've been
uh,
a couple already. You may want to use them.
Can you send me a link?
And you'll see from the one we're just going to do, you'll get an idea of what that covers as well.
I don't think we're locked into any
We
format.
can work with you on it. That's right.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, but I'm looking at the meeting minutes of the outreach and communication group from last Thursday. It was February was tax summary, which is no longer correct. That will be
That'll be-
January.
Yeah,
Uh,
that'll go out.
Water
So
and
Feb-
sewer was going to be March. There's going to be an update today. So I would suggest that water and sewer be delayed until April. And then Mary, if you could do cultural and historical in May rather.
What happened to March?
So June for cultural and historical.
Hold on, Mary, he sort of jumped the gun here.
No,
We
May,
have
would-
January, January, we're gonna do the survey.
right?
And then we have February, March, and April.
Okay, but are you talking about the publication related to a TED Talk, or you're talking
we're
about
talking
a
about
TED
the
Talk to
TED
this
Talk.
The
group?
TED Talk.
The TED
To
Talk.
this group, okay.
So if we have the survey in January, and now Mr. Romer is saying water and sewer wants April, we have February and March.
So if April is the date, the month that you're gonna do cultural and historical for the newspaper, then I need to be either February or March, I would
Right,
think.
well, I'm saying, which would you prefer?
February,
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Okay, send water and sewer then will be March, right?
Yeah, but you just said April, so that's why I'm confused,
Okay,
but I'm born confused. Okay, so water and sewer are March. And who do we want
Cultural
for
his-
April?
right.
Any thoughts?
I think we can probably revisit that next month.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, let's see how things progress in the
Okay.
various task groups.
That's fine. So we've got January for the survey, February for cultural, and March for water and sewer.
Yeah.
Tentatively.
And by the time we get to April and be prepared for April, we may have more coming out of climate change and a couple of others. So to Brian's point, let's hold off and discuss that in January.
Okay.
Okay. Now that we got that straight. Okay, Brian,
Sure.
you want to talk about taxes?
Yeah, and before I share my screen, I want to apologize to the people on this committee that have heard a lot of this tax stuff already. I feel like for some of you, we're beating a dead horse, but the reason why we wanted to do this TED Talk tonight is because Nikki from Bolton Access TV has done a really great job of converting Stasha's housing talk into a short video. And so by presenting our tax discussion in tonight's meeting, we're hoping that maybe she can also work some magic and convert this into a shorter video that can be shared publicly. So with that out of the way, what I'm going to do is share my screen, and Ken and I are going to present our TED Talk about taxes in Bolton. All right, can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay. So what we will do is we will lead off with a discussion of just the first question, which Ken can tackle.
Bring up what I need, okay. I have too many screens here. Okay, so the first part of this is to just define the different kinds of taxes that we have. And I guess what we have found so far is that people don't really understand this. So we have, of course, the real estate taxes, which is the predominant one, but there's also a personal property tax on business equipment of businesses. So, you know, your laptop, even if you work out of your house, is not subject to that tax, but the computers or even communications equipment at at the cell tower sites and things of that sort are subject to those taxes. There's motor vehicle excise taxes that everybody pays annually. And then we have, in recent years, have accepted both the room tax and the meals tax, which apply to hotels and restaurants and constitute I don't know, a percent or two to the town of that money. And so those are the principal ones. Now, I think the next
Yeah, so
the next slide actually breaks down the real estate. So if you could go to the next slide, Brian, that would be good.
no, that Ken, that's
Oh, I'm sorry,
further.
that's yours. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. As I say it, I'm looking at too many screens at once. So, but just to reiterate, the real estate is the main tax, and we actually have a table later that shows some of that breakdown. And residential is by far the largest part of that. And we can talk maybe later about what it means to have smaller or larger business taxes. So Brian will go ahead now and cover then what the taxes get used for.
Yeah, so this chart shows a breakdown of the town's overall operating budget, which in total is just north of $25 million for the current fiscal year. You'll see we give the hard numbers for the main categories of government expenditure as well as the percentage. And those percentages are fairly consistent, at least for the past few years. For example, education has always been hovering around that 64-65% of our budget. Debt service is something that does fluctuate just a little bit more because obviously when we have some bigger projects that we're paying for, the debt service might go up. But in the past few years, our debt service has been ticking down. And you'll see, I feel compelled to mention this because I don't think people necessarily realize that the human services category, that actually includes our Council on Aging. And you'll see that human services as a whole is less than 1% of our total budget. And Council on Aging obviously is meant to serve our senior population, which we know from our demographic presentation a few months
20%.
ago is like, yeah, close to 20% of the
Yep,
town.
that's
So I
what
think
I
it's helpful for people to be aware of that. Another thing to just quickly mention is that culture and recreation, that includes the library as well as Parks and Rec. And then this is just a quick visual display of sort of the magnitude of the different areas of expense. Public safety is our second biggest expense after education. All right, and now I think this, Ken, is what you were going to say a little bit more about.
Yeah, and for the future, we might want to have this tagged on to the other one and then do the budget after, because I don't think that the budget really affects what is in this one. So it might be, from a continuity point of view, it might be better to cover this at the beginning of what the taxes are. But this shows the different classes of property and their assessed valuation for this fiscal year. So we're sitting with over 93% being residential and open space. and about 6.5% that is commercial, industrial, and the personal property. And so that's why when people may complain about their taxes or whatever, the fact that we have that 93.5% of our taxes are involved residences is what really, is an important piece of information in all of this. Now, one of the things that happens every year in coming up with what the tax rate is going to be is a determination by a recommendation by the assessors and then a decision by the selectmen at a public hearing to decide what the tax classification breakdown is going to be between the different classes. And you could have what's called a split tax rate and have a higher rate on businesses than on residential. And if your bottom line is the same, then that's going to mean that the businesses are carrying more of that. So if you have a place like Boston or some place that has major businesses, or maybe 15, 20% of their property is in that class, then that might make a difference. The problem here is that the business taxes apply to agriculture. And so and it would also apply potentially to some small businesses that we might have. And so we were basically, if we up the taxes on those people, especially the farmers, we would be adversely affecting them and could potentially encourage them to not keep their land in agriculture and sell out for more housing or whatever, which would make it even worse. And so every year that I've been in town, the assessors have recommended and the selectmen have voted to have a single tax rate or a tax classification of 1, which means that everybody has the same tax rate. And we'll, after we discuss a little more about 2.5, we'll actually talk about how the tax rate is computed and what that all means. But the important point here is that even though we have businesses, we're taxing them at the same rate as our residences, and that's important for keeping the businesses that we have.
Okay, now this
Brian?
is going to be a fast primer on Proposition 2.5. So everybody, I think, has heard of Proposition 2.5, but there's something important to keep in mind, which is that 2.5 piece of Prop 2.5, there's actually 2 components of it. And so what it means is that from year to year, your levy limit can only increase a maximum of 2.5%. So that's the first piece. But then also there's something known as the levy ceiling, which is your total tax levy cannot exceed 2.5% of the aggregate value of the entire town, which is this, $1.1 billion. That's what Bolton is currently valued at as a whole. And so what you'll see here is we've got our FY21 current fiscal year tax levy. The maximum levy, this number right here, is, you'll see on the next page, it's a function of increasing our levy limit by 2.5%, which we're allowed to do every year. So that's like allowable 2.5% growth. It also includes new growth, and it includes the debt that is otherwise excluded. And so that's why you'll see that on the next page, we had our fiscal year levy last year of 21 million. If you increase 21 million by 2.5%, it's that 22.4. But our actual maximum levy is slightly larger than that because you have this debt that is otherwise excluded that gets sort of included back in terms of what we're allowed to tax up to. And so Bolton, as part of our budgeting process, we add the 2.5% to our tax levy. And then in any given year, I'll go back for a second. So like this past fiscal year, our maximum that we could have taxed to was 23.6 million, but we're only taxing 23.5 million. So we have some excess capacity, which is, I think, a good thing. I just want everybody to be aware of that. And then another thing to mention too is people have heard of overrides and debt exclusions, and technically they're both overrides, but people refer to general overrides and debt exclusions, which are a form of override. A general override is actually a permanent increase in the amount that you can tax for general budget purposes, and that's something that the town would have to vote for in an annual town election. And then these debt exclusions are temporary. They also have to be approved by the voters at a town election and at a town meeting, but they go away after the debt is retired. So this again is the calculation for the current fiscal year. And you'll see that, so that 23.6 million, no, sorry, it's back here. This is what we're actually levying for this year, the 23.5. That is funding our operations for the current fiscal year. And then Ken was going to just walk us through how the tax rate is calculated.
Okay. One of the things to point out is that it's a moving target almost until the end of the year. And from my experience, one of the reasons that we sometimes end up with the excess capacity is because once all the numbers come in, they turned out to be slightly different from what they were estimated to be at the time the advisory committee was putting together all of the numbers that went into the budget. And so the actual tax rate is usually has to be done by the end of December, by around now, so that it can then be applied correctly. Otherwise, they have estimated that people have to do. But it's basically the tax levy that Brian talked about, the number that came out of the whole budgetary process and turned out to be the levy for the fiscal year, divided by the valuation of the town. And so in this particular year, it's $20.86. Now the valuation is something that is provided by the assessors, and they do two things. One is that they actually go around to individual houses every 3 years or so, and they sometimes even pay extra money to a consultant to come in and update the values. The rest of the time, what they do is look at sales that have occurred and make adjustments that might be needed that way. So, but in any case, they come up with the number of what the valuation is, and then that's used in order to determine it. Now, we've had people get really upset about the tax rate, but really, because of the way that it's done, it's kind of a misrepresentation of being upset that the rate is there because it's what we were allowed to raise, and that all got approved by the town. And then the assessors figured out what the value of the town was, and that determined the rate. And so that'll change from year to year. And one thing I would also mention is that we've never come close to the $25 that would represent that maximum ceiling, that levy ceiling that Brian mentioned. And the main reason for that is because the valuation keeps going up. And so as long as the valuation is going up, then the amount that's being raised keeps reasonably steady. And it just sort of depends on when we have debt or something of that sort. But anyway, so the rate for this year is 2086. It's slightly more, I believe, than what we had last year.
Yep.
But what's really important, which is in the next part, the slide that's up now, is the average tax bill. So one of the other things that the assessors do is run the numbers after they have established all the valuations and come up with the average for the valuation of a single family home in the town. And for this year, that's 549,200. And so the average, and so if you take the tax rate, which is, by the way, the 2086 is per thousand, and so you apply that to that average house, then the average tax bill is $11,456. And so if you live in a smaller, less valuable house than the average, then your taxes are going to be a little bit lower. If you live in a mansion or a house that is worth significantly more than the average, then you're going to pay more taxes. And that's just the way that it falls out. Anyway, so now Brian's going to talk more about how this ties in with other communities.
Yeah, so we just wanted to close out the presentation by giving a little bit of context for how Bolton compares. So there's no denying the fact that on the previous slide, our average single family tax bill, that is on the higher side across the state. So I think it's like probably for fiscal 21, it's going to be in the top 30 communities in terms of average single family tax bill. But what this chart here on the left does is we took a bunch of municipalities and we looked at their total budget and divided it by the number of residents that they had. And we had to use, I think we had to use all 2018 numbers because we needed to have same population figures available for all the communities at the same time. Anyway, we basically calculated a budget per person for each community. And you'll see that Bolton is sort of right in the middle of the pack. But part of the issue is because we are a smaller community, some of the services that every municipality has to provide, like fire and police, education, like some of those are costs that they're expensive to a point, and there's a limit to how much we can reduce them while still providing the service. And so, you know, Bolton, we're spending money, but on a per capita basis, we're actually doing pretty well. And then the other thing to keep in mind, and I didn't have a slide on revenues because we didn't really want to get into that too much, but Bolton, unlike some other communities, doesn't really get very much state aid because state aid is largely a function of the socioeconomic status of the people who live in the community. And so again, like this is Bolton's median household income compared to some of the other communities in our region. And so we're, you know, pretty close to the top there. And that limits how much we're able to get from the state in terms of revenue. So all things considered, is Bolton expensive? I think it is a bit of a matter of perspective. I do think the town really does try hard, though, to make sure that they're conservative in their spending. And with that, I will stop my screen share. And if people have questions, I know a lot of people have heard all this stuff before, but we did want to present it to the group formally.
Where does the override get applied if it's a permanent change? Is it the tax levy or is it just some other figure that's not obvious?
Yeah, it would, Ken, feel free to jump in, but so it would basically permanently raise it would raise in a given year what our tax levy was, but then that would carry forward for all subsequent years.
So it would be in the next year, and so the allowable growth for the next year on 2.5 would apply to that larger number.
Okay.
And it's also worth mentioning that as far as those numbers are concerned, is that is what the new growth really means. New growth is in there. It was actually added maybe 3 or 4 years after 2.5 went in, because where you had a growing town where services were going up and more kids were going to schools and things of that sort, and you were restricted to the levy in a particular year, then you end up really getting over a period of time getting in trouble. So new growth is a representation of well, literally what it's saying, but it's the value on December 31st of whatever was being worked on in the town during that year. And if it's just partly done, then either it's lower valuation or they don't count it at all in the new growth. And it's an estimated number that the assessors provide to the selectmen and advisory. And they're under pressure a lot because we always wanted to have that number be as high as possible. But if they overestimate it and they turn out to be wrong, then they have to adjust numbers downward at the end of the year. And that ends up causing problems on the budget cycle. So there's a balance there between conservatism on the part of the assessors and the way they're looking at new stuff and the needs to be spending. But all of that gets folded into the levy, as Brian said.
We seem very reluctant to even try overrides. I don't think we've had one since about 95. Are they deemed so terribly unpalatable that they're not worth even offering to the public?
We had a number of them in the early years of 2.5.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
we had quite a few.
yeah, I think we had 13. And so it was almost an annual thing into the mid 90s. Then we had a gap, and the last one that we attempted, I believe, was turned down in 2005.
I don't remember that.
In some respects, I guess you could say it's not palatable now.
Mhm.
But the other way you could look at it is that we've survived pretty well in terms of the services that we've provided and with the stuff that we've been able to buy with the debt exclusion without having to do a general one. In the early days, we really needed it. And the one I'll always remember was when we got the original override that we proposed was rejected by the town, and we went back to look at new numbers and basically came up with what we thought was reasonable to cut and bring that forward. And it's all related to essentially taking free cash down to almost zero. And nobody in power at the time, on advisory or in the selectmen, we all knew that you couldn't take the free cash down to zero, but that was what we faced. So in those days, there was a lot of politicking needed to make people understand why the money was needed. And really in the last 10 years or so, we have not had serious budget cuts, and we have not had anything that I can think of except for capital expenses where we were in such dire straits that we needed to have the override.
Mhm.
But the schools could certainly be in that situation potentially, and there could be other departments. But we've managed pretty well to do it. I mean, you think about it, when we increased when we made the fire department to have a full-time chief and things of that sort. I mean, we've increased the annual outlay significantly for those, but we've been able to absorb it in the way that we've been able to manage the cash and to bring money in and things of that sort. So we haven't needed the override, but that's where you would want to do it. So if you really needed to add something that wasn't capital, that was people, or that was where there would be an unpalatable reduction in the service that the school system was providing, then that's where I think you would want to think about an override. But it would really require a lot of politicking on the part of people in favor of that to explain why.
Also, I think that over the years, in the at least last 15 years, the valuation of the town has increased significantly, or the last even 20 years, which has made a huge difference.
That's right.
And I think that the management of the fiscal management has improved, no question, compared to how we were doing it back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, that seems like the dark ages now, but we were doing it running the town on Excel sheets. So there have been a lot of changes, but I think the increase in the valuation of the town has definitely contributed to the lack of need for an override. I was thinking that maybe you should explain the difference between commercial and industrial, Brian.
Oh, you think I should do that, Penny?
Yeah, I shouldn't do it. I'm not head of advisory. You are.
Yeah, well, I'm not an assessor, and actually, so I guess I'll give you a really basic example. We're all familiar with places like the Bolton Bean, or what used to be the International, or Bolton Orchard. So those would all be taxed as commercial property. I think that, so for example, there's the new proposed marijuana facility. There's some question about whether aspects of that would be considered industrial and taxed under the industrial, but the tax rate is all the same. But it's
Right.
industrial is something that doesn't have a customer-facing operation, and it's like manufacturing and things like that, right, Ken?
Yeah, and it doesn't affect, as you said, it doesn't affect the taxes. It's more a function of the zoning that it, and the allowable uses in particular zones. And so certain things are allowed in commercial or our limited business zones that, well, would be allowed in industrial, but there are things that are allowed in industrial that wouldn't be allowed in the, in the limited business or the lower levels. But from tax point of view, there's really no difference.
So what I'm wondering is if you should combine the commercial / industrial as one number.
It is.
You've got it broken out by 38 and 11.
Well, I mean, we're just following the practice that the assessors use, so I think we
Okay.
want to continue to do that.
Okay.
But we can certainly explain when the time comes what the significance, if any, is of that.
Isn't there some extra money that would be created in regards to that marijuana facility, that like an extra tax? Why is
Oh,
it
yeah.
that people
Yeah,
say
there's
that
a,
they're
yeah,
gonna
there's a
make
tax for that. Yeah, there's a tax for
a
that.
special tax just for
Yep.
what, marijuana production?
I don't remember, but definitely for something related to it.
Yeah, I think it's labeled as community impact.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would be another where we had the listing of things that go into the taxes. That would be another tax that would be added on that would be a benefit to the town to help offset whatever impacts, some of the impacts that there might be on the town of having a facility.
And I think that's a negotiated number, right? Based on, it goes into the agreement that the company would make with the selectmen or something, and there's like a range of percentage. And so I don't know that we know what that number would be yet, but it's kind of baked into the host community agreement, maybe.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's up to 3% of the gross revenue.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
It would probably be good to have a pretty good answer on that, either preferably process, where I think we're not at the point where numbers are going to be able to be generated, but I suspect that in the town evaluating and having public hearings on this, that question is going to be asked, and people ought to be prepared to answer it. What's the upside in terms of adding to the tax base, and what kind of taxes would be added? Okay, any more questions? That was great. Um, Looking forward to this. I'm just looking at our schedule. I think wherever possible, we should plan to take a TED Talk, turn it into a publishable document, which Brian and Ken already have, and have that out within a month of the TED Talk. So we're talking now about, we've just done taxes in December. We're going to do survey in January, cultural and historical in February, water and sewer in March, and to be determined in April. So that would mean that we're going to have taxes published in January, the survey published in February, March, cultural and historical, and April, water and sewer. And then we'll determine based on whatever we decide for the TED Talk in April, what we're going to do in June.
Now,
Sound good?
that sounds fine to me. Do you want the transportation one to be written up? Because we never, I mean, that was the
I was
guinea
going to
pig-
ask the same for
that was the
housing.
guinea pig talk, but we didn't ever publish anything on that.
That's true. We have both housing
And then housing
transportation.
also.
Okay. Hey, Erica, I believe we have documents on the website for both of those, do we not?
We do. So we have the PowerPoint presentations posted, and then I have a link to the these meetings where the TED Talks were given.
And we also have, both for housing and transportation, we have what items, hooks, as we put it, on media to tie in to what we have on the website. So we've already taken care of that.
Good,
You may-
okay. Okay.
You may want to take a look at it and make sure that it works.
Where-
I've checked.
Where
it.
is this?
What?
I'm horrified that I haven't seen it yet.
And you haven't seen the housing video, the Nikki did.
No,
Okay, and that's my, I just sent a note off to Ms. Bolton Access. Nikki hasn't got to me. Nikki, if you're listening, I know you're always ready to present your video. Could you present the latest and greatest version of the housing video?
Is she there?
Well, it
It may
says
not
that
be
she's
she.
there.
It could be John that's doing it. I don't know.
Okay, well, in any case, we will get that out. I mean, there were changes that we agreed to make as of last Thursday.
Yeah, and I don't know if she's made them, because Brian, you
no,
were gonna
and-
give her a voiceover, right?
That was my question, whether the voiceover has been included yet. So I will take it upon myself to follow up with her. We have a link to it, but it's a link that hopefully now is a little bit out of date. And when we get the most recent version with a voiceover, then I'll get that out to everybody. And so
Nikki's
you
done
can
a
take-
fabulous job, though.
She really has. She's done an absolutely
She's-
excellent job.
Yeah, it's really impressive.
So, and she's really very enthusiastic, very engaged, and very creative, and has worked very well with folks in each one of these presentations. So kudos to her. If you're listening. Okay. The next one is water and sewer, Mark. And this
Yeah.
is not a TED Talk, it's more of a, hey, where are we and where are we going?
Yeah,
You want to share your screen or?
I can try.
Erica, you're open for screen sharing by individual participants, right?
I should be.
Well, Brian did, so it must be that others can't.
Okay. Okay, can we see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Always have to ask with all these different things. Okay. So water and sewer task group. So just quickly, our charter is to look at kind of the current and future needs of the town, both for supplies of potable water, basically drinking water, either, and look at options for on-site and off-site ways of providing, providing drinking water and for sewage treatment and disposal. And then as part of all of that, also looking at improving emergency and climate change resiliency in those, in supplying both of those, because both of those are very critical to people staying surviving. So, okay, so quickly, our members, myself, Bob Romer is our benevolent overlord. 3 non-committee members, Kevin O'Brien, Chris Slade, and Barry Gherkin. Okay. On the water side, we spent a lot of time collecting a lot of data, analyzing the kind of identifying where the main aquifers in town are and getting general assessments of what the quantities and qualities of those are. Collecting some data on kind of current wells and any, the aquifer depths and changes over time as people draw on the aquifers, it can draw down those aquifers and wells that are fine today could be running dry tomorrow because neighbors have pulled water that, and dropped it below the level of your well. And we've done some work on collecting some of the anecdotal data on, changes and failures with wells. One of the things we're working on doing is generating kind of a parameterized model of what a public water supply would cost, both either for part of the town or for all of the town. And on the surveys, public water and public sewer were something that came up full time. So, we want to give people an idea of what they're really talking, what that sort of thing would cost. And then we'll also be looking at some, if we went with centralized water supply, what zoning changes would that allow? Right now there's minimum distances between wells on adjacent properties and such. So if the wells aren't there, arguably you could have smaller lots and more dense housing if that was the direction that the town wanted to go. Similarly on the sewer side, we're looking at kind of putting together some summaries on what kind of the current on-site disposal, on-site septic system options are. They've changed a lot, or they've advanced a lot over the last 20 years or so. So there's a lot of places where that have when people are repairing or installing new ones, there's a lot more options for what they can do. And as part of all of that, we're also, and this also goes to helping to educate some of the, well, I'll say some of the newer town residents, but some of the older town residents might also benefit from this, is kind of care and feeding of your septic system, kind of as a write-up to, to help people understand what it is and how they need to, what you need to maintain it properly. And then we're also reviewing some of the there's been a perennial feeling that all the systems in the center of town are in imminent failure and there's no option to repair those. And we've reviewed a lot of that data and we'll be providing some details on, I guess what I'd say is the real story there. And then similar to water, we're going to look at within an order of magnitude or so, kind of what would a kind of a centralized waste treatment system, sewage treatment system cost either townwide or in selected sections of the town. And similar to water, we'll look at, if you don't have a septic system on your lot, what does that mean for lot sizes and offsets and that sort of thing. And then, so, in addition to what our sections in the master plan, we're writing up a few side discussions. One is kind of the impact of lawn irrigation on water usage. As I said, the care and feeding of a septic system, and then right up to kind of, talk about some of the terminology that's used with septic systems, and kind of trying to put that in more layman's terms so that people can understand when they're looking at, when people are talking about septic systems and such, what all the numbers and terms really mean, so they can, understand what's going on a little bit better. And that, in a nutshell, is it.
Yeah, a couple of things have come out of these discussions, one of which is there is very little understanding of what's involved in either a public water supply or a public sewage system in terms of costs. And there is a lack of general understanding about the maintenance of septic systems, to the extent that there are a number of more recent residents in town who frankly don't realize they have one, and that the town is not responsible for their sewage. So one of the things that the Board of Health has done in the past is put together a set of simple, straightforward guidelines about how a septic system works and what one needs to do in order to maintain it and maintain the longevity of it, because they are obviously expensive little machines to repair. The work that we've done on a public water supply has been kind of interesting. The recommendations we've gotten is, if you're going to go with public water, you really ought to go with fire water, as well as potable water. The fire department's perspective is we have enough sources, including access to other towns' water supplies, public water supplies, in order to keep Bolton reasonably safe. And that, as a result of real data, most recently from the extension of the water supply in Lancaster, the average cost per subscriber to a public water supply system is $35,000 a subscriber, which is not going to be very a very positive element of this discussion. And the conversation we've had about the public water supply as well, suppose we just want to put in water, and the answer to that is, it's not about the cost of the pipe. It's about the cost of putting it there, and whether you put in a little 2-inch pipe or a 3-inch pipe, and the necessity for putting in a much larger pipe, the cost of the pipe is absolutely insignificant to the cost of blasting through rock and filling. So that's almost a moot point. The difference is maybe not insignificant, but not very great. One of the things that Mark has done is looked at irrigation, which has been, Mark, you may want to talk about that briefly, somewhat surprising about the implications to groundwater, not necessarily in the aquifer areas, in which we do have an amazing amount of groundwater capacity, but in areas where you're in rock. You want to talk about that, Mark? Numbers?
I can give you on just the 50,000 foot view. Or,
yeah.
Okay. So I mean, the simple answer is that if grass needs about an inch of water a week to stay green. So if you want your lawn to stay green all summer, if you water, turn your sprinklers on and you water an inch a week, for 12 weeks. And this is where I'm looking at like a quarter acre of grass. That is kind of what 100 by 100 square foot or 100 by 100 foot area. That's you're using equivalent of about 2.5 4-bedroom houses or about 2.5 times the average use of a single family home in Bolton. So if you have 10 houses that are all doing that, that's the same as having 25 houses without sprinklers in them.
So it's not insignificant, and there are a lot of solutions to that. It's not a matter of don't have green lawns. It's have, among other things, be more specific about how you do it. Don't aerate your water. Do it with drip irrigation. Stick to your landscaping. Use better grass, more drought resistant. But it's kind of been interesting to start looking at this, and we are developing a fair amount of data, and we're on to the next step, which is, as a result of this data, first of all, some reality about what it says and recommendations about where we need to go in terms of, and to Sharon's comment to either me or the whole group, the feeding of septic systems means use it for septic. Don't necessarily dump wastewater down it continuously.
Yeah, I mean, technically on Title V, you're not supposed to be putting your water treatment backwash into your septic.
Right. Which, among other things, kills the field,
Yeah.
which many people in Bolton have experienced at great expense.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we briefly go through the other, let me bring them up, the other groups. Climate change and action, as I think was mentioned before, Sharon's putting that team together and revisiting the scope, and we'll be able to make some recommendations on where that goes, although a fair amount of work, particularly in the area of municipal vulnerability and that aspect of climate change is being addressed through Rebecca and her team. Culture and historic resources, Mary, you've briefly summarized where you are. Economic development is dead in its tracks. I think we've pretty much agreed that when we get past COVID, at least get along with less constraints in COVID, and we can sit down and talk to individual people and put together a forum on that. We'll make some movement on that. Housing has moved well along. And I'm sorry that the latest version of the video isn't available. We will make it available with a link. But Mark and Stasha have done a great job on that with Chris Rogers. Mark is actually on the video talking about it. Land use, I don't think we've made much progress on that at this point. Erica, do you want to talk about that, other than doing a fair amount of GIS? And certainly the land use team has been very supportive in identifying aquifers and yields and that sort of thing for us.
I don't really have an update at present. I know where I want to go in the steps moving forward. I just haven't done it yet, but
Okay,
I'll
no,
have an
that's fine.
update for you in January.
Okay, Penny, municipal facilities and services are beginning to move ahead again.
Yes, now that we have a new head of the DPW, and I did ask MAPC for comparisons for town services, because it's really tough to get any comparisons that are apples for apples, not apples for, cantaloupes. So working on that.
Okay, and our new DPW head, incidentally, has a pretty substantial background in water and sewage, and he will be providing input on the existing town sewage treatment plants to us. He was in our last Zoom meeting on Monday. Open space and rec, Ed, Ken.
Nothing new right now.
Okay. Public outreach and communication, I think I've summarized that. Incidentally, when it comes to that, if you go into Dropbox and into that task group, all of the meetings have meeting minutes with all of the information presented in those meetings in the meeting subfolder. So you can bring yourself up to date on the detail if you're interested. I hope you're interested. Schools, Patty, we haven't been able to make
No.
anything on that at this point. Not sure, you know, I think we've got to get past this semester, well, next semester actually, before we go further on that. Survey we've talked about. I think it's, you know, it's been a great story. It's worked really well. And now is the time to use that as a mechanism to have a conversation with the residents of the town. And transportation improvements, we've had that.
Not much. I did connect with Randy Heglin, the new DPW director, and Ken and I will be meeting with him probably in the next month or two.
Okay. Okay, so we're moving. I think one of the things that I believe transportation is doing and water and sewer are doing right now is actually getting into writing the report. We've put an outline together. We've actually beginning to flesh it out and identify who's doing what in getting the information into the report, both what we know, what the options are, and then ultimately we need to get our heads together to make recommendations and suggest elements of the implementation matrix. So that's going to be the next big step for all of the groups in the reasonably near future. And we do have templates for that Ryan has sent out and referred to. So if there's nothing else, let's set a date for the next meeting. Again, Thursday at 7 o'clock. Let me pull up my calendar. Fourth Thursday, if I recall correctly. So that would be the 28th of January. Okay. Is there any reason that doesn't work for anybody?
It's fine.
Okay.
The one upside of COVID is the availability of people. Oh, and not having to travel in snowstorms.
Right.
Although I must say that I don't know if you've noticed, but I went still a couple of times. Compliments of Comcast. We've certainly had trouble at this end of the town on internet availability, despite we have great routers and great Wi-Fi. We have a kind of thin line beyond that. So, thank you all. There are no other
Would
questions.
you like a motion to adjourn?
Thank you.
I make a motion
second?
to adjourn.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Happy
Thank
New
you
Year,
very much.
everybody.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays to everybody.
Bye.